Welcome back to You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope podcast. We're on episode 2 today. We're talking about the high cost of silence, addressing mental health issues. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health challenges. Let's face it, sometimes we don't know how to support ourselves, our friends, our family, because we've been conditioned sometimes to be, let's be honest, to function in dysfunction. And we believe it's functional, but it's not until we actually are having conversations that we recognize the way we've been functioning is dysfunctional. So in today's episode, I really want to talk about how to support not only yourself by recognizing signs and symptoms, but your family and your friends. So I want to start with a story on how I became a counselor. And this episode is very important to me because for so long, I did not recognize what silence costs. So it was back in my college days that I met a young girl by the name of Vanessa. Me and her worked together at a mortgage company. And I remember seeing her first come into work, and I'm just a friendly person, so I decided to go up and say, "Hey girl, how are you?" At first she was a little reluctant, but eventually, as I kept going, she eventually began to talk to me. And Vanessa at the time was going through a challenge as she had recently just lost her baby sister in a car accident, literally a month before we met. So from there, me and Vanessa's relationship really began to cultivate and grow together. She became my best friend. And so as life had it, life was happening, and I began to learn about her history, the way she was raised, and Vanessa grew up in the church just as I did. But what I became to understand later on in life is that Vanessa was suffering in a way I didn't understand originally, because she really was quiet and silent about her suffering. It wasn't until an event where she had called me and asked me to take her to go get an abortion. And after the abortion, things just began to change. And I really got to see a different side of Vanessa. But again, I was in college. I didn't recognize that the things I began to see that was going on in Vanessa were not okay. Her silence became very loud to me. And a lot of times I just didn't know how to give a voice to what I was seeing with her. Well, we would continue our life journey. And again, as I said, she was going through her challenges. I was going through challenges. But life had happened, and she ended up getting pregnant again and had a baby, which became my goddaughter. But as life happens to all of us, eventually me and Vanessa lost contact after a interaction where when I called her, the person that I knew, the bubbly young lady, she wasn't on the other line that day. And we disconnected, and literally a few weeks later, I get a phone call from her mother that she committed suicide. And from that situation, I realized that I had missed things after learning more about psychology because I was in school. I had missed the signs and I had missed the symptoms that she was struggling with mental health challenges. So this episode is really to help others recognize the signs and symptoms so that you can support in case you have someone in your life who is silent and they don't give a voice to the things that they are suffering. So, what are signs and symptoms? Well, signs are the things that we can maybe see and hear. This may be recognizing a change in someone's mood or their behavior, right? We can see that they're persistently sad or dealing with anxiety or dealing with mood swings or extreme highs and lows. Or you notice that they're withdrawing. These are things that you can look for that we consider signs. That means you can see them, you can hear them, and they may be saying things like they're struggling to go to work. Then symptoms. Symptoms are the things, though, are that people would have to share with you. And this is where we really have to take notice, right? So they may share that they're struggling to cope with normal activities that they were doing before, or that they have been missing work a lot, or their sleep has been off, or you recognize that their thoughts have been a little bit more negative than lately. So again, these are the signs and symptoms when it comes to maybe recognizing that this person may be dealing with a mental health challenge or mental health obstacle, or life has really hit them and they're having a hard time coping. The next question is, when should you act, right? So there are times where we may be experiencing hard times coping with work, or we may be withdrawing socially, or there might be just changes in moods, especially, us ladies, right? But when there are signs and symptoms that are impacting you in multiple ways, that means if you are having a hard time functioning, or maybe your relationships are impacted as a result of these symptoms, that's when we want you to take the time to consider either talking to someone, a mental health professional, or someone that you trust, right? Because at that point, when they are impacting you to the point where it's happening quite often and it's interfering with your ability to get things done, that's when the signs and symptoms are at the point where you need to take notice. Because generally what happens with signs and symptoms, we're either at the point where it's mild and we're about to maybe head into a crisis, or we're in a crisis, or now all of a sudden the crisis has escalated. So we really want to take the time to notice within ourselves what type of symptoms are happening and how they're really impacting us, so we can decide what type of resource or intervention needs to take place. And ultimately, the earlier that we intervene with these signs and the symptoms, the quicker that we can create treatment plans and really bring support and resources to mitigate the challenge that you may be facing. So we talked about the signs and symptoms. We talked about, hey, let's notice when we should act. But I really want to hone in why you should act, meaning why you should take notice, why you should get support, why you should help someone who may be going through a challenge get support, because there is a cost to unaddressed issues. So let's talk about it. So ultimately, without treatment, mental health symptoms, can worsen over time and lead to increased distress and impairment in other areas as well. So we want to address that. In addition, why should we act? Because without addressing mental health issues, they impair our relationships. A lot of times I've seen with clients that once they are in a crisis mode or they're experiencing a challenge or obstacle, a lot of times, because these symptoms are not addressed, they impact the relationship, where it leads to misunderstandings, conflicts, and ultimately it impacts the healthiness of the relationship dynamics. We also want to make sure that there's not a decline in physical health. There's a lot of correlation to unaddressed symptoms connecting to issues with our physical health, right? We want to act because without it, there can be an increased risk of substance use. A lot of times, individuals will self-medicate and cope when challenges are overwhelming, because they may not have been taught the skills to deal with overwhelming emotions or deal with these challenges or obstacles that are coming about with their mental health. In addition, other issues can be social isolation, financial consequences, and ultimately long-term consequences. So I want to challenge you to take notice when signs and symptoms, whether it's in your life or in the life of family members, have gotten in their way of their ability to function. And at that point, I need you to break the silence. I need you to ask the questions. I need you to say, hey, I'm noticing changes in your moods. I'm noticing changes in your behaviors. You seem a little bit isolated. It is very important that you have those conversations, that you give people the opportunity to get a voice to their silence, to give their silence a voice. So if you are someone you know is struggling to the point where you recognize there are some changes that's been going on with you and you may not understand those changes, and especially if some of those signs and symptoms and those changes include suicidal thoughts, I really, really need you to tune into this part. We need you. The world needs you. The world needs you to show up the way you were created. So I hope that you share that you're struggling with those thoughts so that someone can show you that they can show up for you, that they can remind you that you are needed, that they can get the resources to help you get through this season, this moment. Right? Because those thoughts, sometimes they can be so strong, but I want you to know that there is help available. So I want to leave you with some resources. 988. It is the national hotline for support whenever an individual is in crisis or finding themselves maybe going into crisis. There are professionals that are available 24/7, and it's confidential, and they will walk with you and guide you through that moment to provide you with the support that you need. Again, I want to remind you, if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts, that we need you here, and that there is support and that there is help available. So with that being said, there is a cost to silence, but we want to be the change agents in our community and give people hope by having those conversations, by taking the time to notice when things are different. So I want to leave you with this takeaway. You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice, by Bob Marley. I'll leave you with one more. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it, by Maya Angelou. So, with that being said, I hope you give your silence a voice, that you recognize the signs and symptoms within yourself. You take notice when it's getting in the way of your ability to function, to have healthy relationships, to get things done, and that you reach out to support. There's hope available. And here's the last question I want to leave you with. So, what internal or external factors contribute to your hesitation in speaking up about mental health issues? How can you address or overcome them by prioritizing your well-being? Well, thank you for taking the time to tune into this conversation of You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope. I really hope that you walk away feeling hopeful and having now the ability to recognize signs and symptoms and taking notice and understanding within yourself and maybe for others who may be dealing with those challenges. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who may need this message. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to tune into this episode today. Again, I really hope that you walk away with the hope of noticing signs and symptoms. So in case you have someone in your life who is quite silent about their struggles, that you're taking notice, that you can give a voice to the things that they may be struggling with. I'm so happy that I now get the opportunity to help others find their voice in the midst of their silence and recognize the signs and symptoms and be a part of their journey towards healing and recovery. So, thank you for tuning in to You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Again, share this video. You never know who may need this information, and I hope you walk away feeling hopeful that you're not crazy.